The sun was setting over Watsonville, Montana territory, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street as Abram Vaughn rode his Morgan horse past the general store, ignoring the snickers and whispers that followed him like faithful dogs. It was 1874, and the young cowboy had just made what the entire town considered the most foolish decision of his life, purchasing the old Whitcomb place, a barren stretch of land that hadn't produced a decent crop in over a decade. "There goes the dreamer," called out Benjamin Hollister from his perch outside the saloon, tobacco juice staining his graying beard. "Paid good money for dirt and rocks." Abram kept his eyes fixed forward, his jaw set in the determined line that had become familiar to anyone who knew him. At 26, he had spent most of his adult life working other men's cattle, saving every penny he could. Unlike the other cowboys who spent their earnings on whiskey and cards, Abram had a vision that extended beyond the next payday or the next town. The old Whitcomb place sat 3 miles outside of Watsonville, a humble collection of weathered buildings surrounding a small, dilapidated farmhouse. What most folks couldn't see or refused to see was the creek that cut through the northern edge of the property, a reliable source of water even during the driest Montana summers. Abram saw potential where others saw only failure. As he approached his new property, Abram noticed a thin wisp of smoke rising from behind the farmhouse. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he slowed his horse. Drifters and thieves weren't uncommon, especially in abandoned properties. "Hello." He called out, dismounting and tying his horse to a fence post. "Anyone there?" When no answer came, he cautiously made his way toward the source of the smoke. As he rounded the corner of the house, he found himself face to face with a young woman kneeling beside a small fire. She jumped to her feet, clutching a knife in her hand. "This is private property," Abram said, keeping his hand near his holster but making no move to draw. "I was just leaving," the woman replied, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't quite place. She was too thin, with dirt smudged across her face and clothes that had clearly seen better days. Despite this, there was a fierce intelligence in her violet blue eyes that caught Abram's attention. "Are you hungry?" he asked, relaxing his stance. The woman hesitated, pride battling with obvious hunger. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity if you work for it," Abram replied. "I just bought this place. Could use an extra pair of hands getting it in order before winter sets in." "I'm no farmhand," she said, still gripping the knife. "And what are you then? A botanist, or I was back east?" Abram raised an eyebrow. "A what?" "I study plants, their properties, how they grow, what they can be used for." Abram considered this for a moment. "Got a name? Violet Vance." "Abram Vaughn," he replied with a nod. "Seems we share the same initials, Miss Vance. Might be fate." He offered a small smile. "You know anything about growing things in tough soil?" A flicker of interest crossed her face. "I might." "Then I've got a proposition for you. Help me get this land producing, and you'll have food and shelter for as long as you need it. No charity, just fair trade." Violet studied him carefully, weighing her options. Finally, she slipped the knife into a pocket in her tattered skirt. "1 week. Then I decide if I stay." "Fair enough," Abram agreed, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she shook it, her grip surprisingly firm despite her frail appearance. "Welcome to the most worthless piece of land in Montana territory," Abram said with a wry smile. "At least, that's what everyone in town says." "People often miss what's right in front of them," Violet replied, glancing around the property with an appraising eye that suggested she might already be seeing possibilities that others had overlooked. That night, after Abram had shown Violet to a small room off the main living area where she could sleep, he sat on the porch watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. He wondered what circumstances had brought an educated woman like Violet all the way from the east to be alone and hungry in Montana. He'd noticed how she offered no last name at first, how she tensed whenever he moved too quickly, the wariness in her eyes that spoke of hard experiences. But it wasn't his place to pry. Out here, a person's past was their own business. All that mattered was what they chose to do moving forward. The next morning, Abram woke at dawn to find Violet already outside, examining the soil near the creek. She had a small notebook in her hands, making quick notes as she moved from one area to another. "Find anything interesting?" he asked, approaching with 2 tin cups of coffee. She accepted the cup gratefully. "This land isn't as worthless as people think. The soil near the creek is rich. And I've identified several native plants that indicate good growing conditions." "That's so." Abram couldn't hide his interest. "Previous owner tried wheat like everyone else around here, failed 3 years running." Violet shook her head. "Wheat's not right for this particular soil and position. But there are other options." She took a sip of coffee before continuing. "How much do you know about drought-resistant crops?" "Only what I've heard. Never farmed myself before." "Yet you bought a farm," she observed with a raised eyebrow. Abram shrugged. "Got tired of building other men's dreams, figured it was time to build my own." For the first time, Violet's expression softened slightly. "An admirable sentiment, Mr. Vaughn, but dreams require practical foundations." "That's why I'm hoping you'll stay longer than a week," he replied honestly. "I've got strong hands and a willing back, but it seems I'm short on the knowledge that might make this place work." Later that day, they rode into Watsonville for supplies. The small town consisted of little more than a main street with a general store, saloon, small church, and a smattering of other businesses catering to the surrounding ranches and farms. As they tied their horses outside the general store, Abram noticed the curious stares directed their way. "Word travels fast in small towns," he murmured to Violet. "Best prepare yourself." Inside the store, Martha Wilson, the owner's wife, barely concealed her interest as she helped them gather supplies. "I see you found help for that patch of dirt you bought, Abram," she said, her eyes darting to Violet. "Don't believe we've met, miss." "Violet Vance," Violet replied with cool politeness. "I'm assisting Mr. Vaughn with agricultural planning." Martha's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Agricultural planning? On the old Whitcomb place?" She laughed, not unkindly. "Honey, men twice as experienced as our Abram here have tried to make that land produce. Nothing grows there but disappointment." "With respect, Mrs. Wilson," Violet said, examining a packet of seeds. "Different approaches yield different results." From the back of the store, Gerald Wilson emerged, wiping his hands on his apron. "Abram Vaughn, I was hoping to catch you. Heard you moved onto that place already." He glanced at Violet. "And brought help, I see." "Miss Vance has knowledge that might turn that land around," Abram said firmly. Gerald exchanged looks with his wife. "No offense to the lady, but that land's cursed. Has been since old man Whitcomb lost his wife there in '62. Drought takes everything you plant." "We're planning to work with the conditions, not against them," Violet interjected. "I'd like to purchase these seed packets, please." She placed several varieties on the counter. Gerald picked one up, frowning. "Lentils? Nobody grows lentils around here." "Precisely why they might succeed where others have failed," Violet replied. "They require less water than wheat and can fix nitrogen in poor soil." "Fix what in what now?" Martha asked, confusion evident. "They improve the soil while they grow," Abram explained, surprising himself with this new knowledge that Violet had shared with him that morning. Gerald shook his head. "Fancy ideas don't make rain fall, son. You'd be better off selling that place to Jacob Thornton. He's been wanting to expand his grazing land." Abram's jaw tightened. "Not interested in selling. Suit yourself," Gerald sighed, totaling their purchases. "But don't say we didn't warn you." As they loaded their supplies onto Abram's wagon, 3 cowboys from the Thornton ranch sauntered up, led by Jacob Thornton's oldest son, Daniel. "Well, if it isn't the fool and his." "What are you exactly, miss?" Daniel asked, looking Violet up and down with undisguised interest. "None of your concern," Abram answered before Violet could speak. "Just being neighborly," Daniel said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Pa says you'll be begging to sell by winter. Thought I'd introduce myself to the lady before you both starve or run back east." "Your father is welcome to his opinions," Violet replied coolly, securing a sack of flour. "As are you," Daniel stepped closer. "Pretty and spirited. Shame you've thrown in with a dreamer who doesn't know the first thing about this land." Abram stepped between them. "We've got work to do, Thornton. Best move along." For a tense moment, it seemed Daniel might push the confrontation further, but one of his companions tugged at his arm. "Come on, Dan. Your pa's waiting on those supplies." With a last mocking tip of his hat, Daniel backed away. "See you soon, neighbors, when reality sets in." As they rode back to the farm, Violet was quiet, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she spoke. "The people in town don't seem to think much of your chances." "People like what they understand," Abram replied. "And they don't understand why anyone would want that land." "And why do you want it?" she asked. Abram guided the wagon around a deep rut in the road before answering. "My father was a tenant farmer back in Ohio, worked someone else's land his whole life, barely keeping us fed. When the owner decided to sell, we had nowhere to go. Pa died thinking he'd failed us somehow." He paused, memories clouding his features. "I promised myself I'd have something that was mine, something no one could take away. Even if it's difficult land, especially if it's difficult. The things worth having rarely come easy." He glanced at her. "What about you? What brought you all the way out here from the east?" Violet's gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Let's just say I'm also looking for something that can't be taken away." Over the next few days, Violet proved her worth beyond any doubt. She mapped the property, identifying the areas most suitable for different crops. She showed Abram how to test soil by feel and sight, explaining concepts he'd never considered about water retention and mineral content. They worked from sunrise to sunset, clearing rocks, preparing the ground, and building an irrigation system from the creek that was more efficient than anything the previous owner had attempted. "The key," Violet explained as they dug channels from the creek, "is to use what water we have wisely. These channels are narrow and deep rather than wide and shallow, less evaporation." Abram marveled at her knowledge and her stamina. Despite her initial frail appearance, she worked tirelessly, stopping only when he insisted they take breaks. During those quiet moments, sitting in the shade with water or coffee, they began to share pieces of themselves. He learned that she had studied at a women's college in Massachusetts, that her father had been a professor of natural sciences who encouraged her interest in botany from a young age. She spoke of plants with a passion that transformed her face, making her violet eyes shine with enthusiasm. What she didn't speak of was why she had left the East, or how she had ended up alone and hungry in Montana territory. Abram didn't press, knowing that some stories needed time before they could be told. A week after Violet's arrival, they were visited by Sheriff Thomas Miller, who rode up to the farmhouse just as they were finishing their midday meal. "Afternoon, Abram," the sheriff called, dismounting with a grunt. He was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a graying mustache and kind eyes that had seen their share of hardship. "Thought I'd ride out and see how you're settling in." His gaze shifted to Violet, curiosity evident. "Sheriff Miller, this is Miss Violet Vance," Abram introduced. "She's helping me get the farm established." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Miss Vance, don't believe I've seen you around these parts before." "I arrived recently," Violet replied, her posture tensing slightly in a way that Abram had come to recognize when she felt threatened. "From back east." "That's so." Miller accepted the cup of coffee Abram offered. "Got family in these parts?" "No, sir," Violet answered. "I'm on my own." The sheriff nodded, seeming to consider this information. "Reason I ask, miss, is we had a telegram from authorities in Denver. They're looking for a woman fitting your general description, something about a dispute with a prominent family." Abram watched as the color drained from Violet's face. "Sheriff," he intervened, "Miss Vance has been here helping me. Whatever happened in Denver, if anything, is hardly our concern now." Miller studied Violet for a long moment. No law against changing your scenery, miss, unless there's something more serious involved. There isn't, Violet said firmly, finding her voice. A disagreement about research findings, nothing more. I chose to leave rather than compromise my scientific integrity. The sheriff sipped his coffee, his expression revealing nothing. Scientific integrity, is it? Well, that's a new one. He set down his cup. I've no warrant and no specific name to look for, so I'll leave it at that for now. He turned to Abram. Town's taking bets on how long you'll last out here, son, most giving you till first frost. Then they'll lose their money, Abram replied evenly. We've got plans that will work. The sheriff raised an eyebrow, glancing between them. Miss Vance has agreed to stay on as a partner in this venture, Abram said, surprising both the sheriff and Violet herself with this declaration. Her knowledge is exactly what this land needs. After the sheriff departed, Violet confronted Abram in the field where they had been planting. Partner, when did we decide that? It seemed the right thing to say, Abram replied, driving his shovel into the earth. Unless you're still planning to leave after your week is up, Violet hesitated. I hadn't decided. The work we've started will take months to bear fruit. I can pay you wages if you prefer, but I meant what I said. Your knowledge makes this possible. Seems only fair you share in whatever comes of it. He paused, leaning on his shovel. Unless you need to keep moving because of whatever happened in Denver. Violet's expression closed off. That's not something I wish to discuss. Fair enough, Abram nodded. But if you're running from something or someone, you might find it harder to keep running than to stand your ground. Especially if you have allies. Is that what you're offering, an alliance? I'm offering a partnership, Abram clarified. And yes, that includes standing together if trouble comes. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, Violet finally spoke about Denver. I was hired by a wealthy family, the Prestons, to develop drought-resistant crops for their agricultural investments, she explained, her voice low. My research was promising, showing how certain native plants and alternative crops could survive with minimal water. But Edward Preston, the son, wanted to claim my work as his own. Abram listened silently as she continued. When I refused, he became insistent. Said no one would believe a woman over him anyway. Her hands tightened around her cup. One night he came to my room at their estate. When I rejected his advances, he became violent. I defended myself the only way I could. You hurt him? Abram asked quietly. A fire poker to the shoulder, Violet confirmed. Nothing fatal, but enough to get away. I took my research notes and left that night. I've been moving west ever since, taking odd jobs where I could. She looked at Abram directly. I'm not a criminal, but the Prestons have influence. They could make me appear to be one. Abram nodded slowly. Thank you for trusting me with this. If you want me to leave, I don't, he interrupted. Your past is your own, Violet. Out here, we judge people by what they do, not what they're running from. As summer progressed into early fall, the farm began to transform. The lentils Violet had insisted on planting thrived in the challenging soil, along with several varieties of drought-resistant vegetables and herbs that she cultivated with meticulous care. She introduced companion planting techniques, growing complementary plants together to deter pests and enrich the soil that were foreign to local farming practices. Word of their unusual methods spread through Watsonville. Some dismissed their efforts as the follies of an inexperienced cowboy and a city woman playing at farming. Others, particularly some of the hardscrabble homesteaders who struggled with similar conditions, watched with cautious interest. Abram found himself learning more than he ever expected. Under Violet's guidance, he came to see the land not as an adversary to be conquered, but as a partner to be understood. And as they worked side by side, something else began to grow alongside their crops, a deep respect and affection that neither of them acknowledged openly. It was in the way Abram would ensure Violet took breaks when she pushed herself too hard. In how she would have coffee waiting for him when he returned from tending to their small herd of goats, another of her unconventional choices that had raised eyebrows in cattle country, but proved well-suited to their rocky terrain. It was in their conversations that stretched late into the evening, discussing everything from literature to philosophy to their hopes for the farm. One afternoon in late September, Daniel Thornton and two other men from his father's ranch rode onto their property as Abram and Violet were constructing a greenhouse using salvaged window glass. "Quite the operation you've got here, Vaughn," Daniel called out, dismounting. "Pa's impressed you've lasted this long." "Your father is welcome to visit himself if he's curious," Abram replied, setting down his hammer. Daniel laughed. "He's too busy running a real ranch to inspect your garden." His gaze shifted to Violet, who had straightened from her work, trowel in hand. "Although the company might make it worth the trip." "State your business, Thornton," Abram said, stepping forward. "We've got work to do." "Just a friendly visit," Daniel replied, though his tone suggested otherwise, "and to deliver a message from Pa. He's raised his offer for this land. Says he'll give you enough to buy something more suitable for a man with your limited experience." "Not interested," Abram stated firmly. Daniel's smile faded. "You might want to reconsider. Winter's coming. First big snow could wipe out whatever you've managed to grow here. Pa's offer won't stay open forever." "We're well prepared for winter," Violet interjected, moving to stand beside Abram. "Thank your father for his concern, but we're committed to this land." Daniel's eyes narrowed at her use of we. "You've cast your lot with him, have you?" "Interesting choice for an educated woman." "The most intelligent choice I've made," Violet replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a greenhouse to finish before the weather turns." For a moment, tension crackled in the air. Then Daniel shrugged, an insincere smile returning to his face. "Your funeral, both of you, but remember the offer when you're shivering and hungry come January." He turned to his companions. "Let's go, boys. Nothing worth our time here." As they rode away, Violet released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That man makes my skin crawl." "Thorntons have always thought they owned everything and everyone around here," Abram said, watching the riders disappear down the road. "Jacob's been buying up struggling homesteads for years. Can't stand the idea that someone might succeed where others failed." "Is that why you're so determined to make this work? To prove him wrong?" Abram considered the question. "Maybe at first, now." He looked around at what they'd accomplished in just a few months: the flourishing garden beds, the innovative irrigation system, the small but healthy herd of goats, the half-built greenhouse. Now it's about proving we were right. The word "we" hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. As October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first threat of frost, Abram and Violet worked to harvest and preserve as much of their produce as possible. The root cellar beneath the farmhouse was steadily filling with stored vegetables, dried herbs, and preserved fruits from the wild plum trees that grew along the creek. Their efforts had yielded more than expected, enough that Abram suggested they take some of their surplus to sell at the general store. "People should see what this land can produce," he argued when Violet expressed hesitation. Eventually she agreed, and they loaded a wagon with carefully packed vegetables, dried lentils, and jars of preserves. The journey into Watsonville was marked by Violet's unusual quietness. "Having second thoughts?" Abram asked as they approached the town. "No," Violet replied, then sighed. "Perhaps a little. I've grown accustomed to our privacy. In town, there are always questions, always eyes watching." Abram nodded in understanding. "We don't have to stay long, just long enough to show them what we've accomplished." The reaction in town was mixed, just as Abram had anticipated. Martha Wilson at the general store was genuinely impressed by the quality of their produce, agreeing to buy a portion and display the rest for her customers. "Never thought I'd see the day," she admitted, examining a jar of plum preserves. "You two have worked miracles on that land." Others were less enthusiastic. Several ranchers who'd gathered at the store eyed their goods with skepticism. "Lucky summer," commented one grizzled man. "Wait till winter hits proper." "Novelty crops," said another dismissively, "not practical for feeding a family through hard times." But a few of the homesteaders' wives showed genuine interest, particularly in the lentils and drought-resistant beans that Violet had cultivated. One woman, Sarah Jenkins, whose family farmed a difficult patch south of town, lingered to ask Violet detailed questions about growing techniques. "My husband's wheat failed 2 years running," she confided. "He's too proud to try something different, but I've got a kitchen garden that keeps us going. Maybe some of your methods could help." Violet hesitated only briefly before offering to share some seeds and advice. "Come out to the farm sometime," she suggested. "I can show you what's working for us." As they were preparing to leave town, Sheriff Miller approached their wagon. "Word is you two have turned that worthless land into something," he said, inspecting their remaining produce. "Impressive." "Thank you, Sheriff," Abram replied cautiously, noting the official tone in Miller's voice. "Had another telegram from Denver yesterday," Miller continued, his gaze shifting to Violet. "More specific this time. Looking for a Violet Vance formerly employed by the Preston family. Something about stolen research papers and assault." Violet's hands tightened on the reins. "It wasn't theft. Those papers were my work, my research." "And the assault?" Miller pressed. "Self-defense," Abram answered for her. "Sheriff, you know as well as I do that a woman's word doesn't carry much weight against a wealthy man's. But you've seen who Miss Vance is, what she's capable of creating rather than destroying. Does that match the description of a thief or someone violent?" Miller studied them both for a long moment. "No," he finally conceded. "It doesn't, but the law is the law, Miss Vance. If there's a formal charge filed, I'd have to act on it." "I understand," Violet replied, her voice steady despite the fear Abram could see in her eyes. "Fortunately," Miller continued, "the telegram wasn't a warrant, just an inquiry. And telegraph lines get awfully unreliable this time of year, what with storms coming in from the mountains." He adjusted his hat. "Might be weeks before I can send a proper response." Relief flooded Violet's face. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me," Miller said gruffly. "Just keep growing those vegetables. My wife was mighty impressed with those carrots." As they drove home, the tension gradually eased from Violet's shoulders. "That was unexpected," she admitted. "I've grown so used to looking over my shoulder. People here form their own judgments," Abram replied. "And you've given them plenty of reasons to judge in your favor." That evening, as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, they sat close together by the fire in the farmhouse. The wind had picked up, whistling through the repaired but still drafty windows, carrying the promise of the harsh Montana winter to come. "Do you think we've done enough?" Violet asked, gazing into the flames. "To survive the winter, I mean." "Thanks to you, we have more than enough food stored," Abram assured her. "Firewood stacked high, livestock sheltered, roof repaired. We're as ready as we can be." Violet nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "And if the Prestons pursue their accusations?" "If Sheriff Miller receives an actual warrant," Abram reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. It was the first time he had initiated such contact, and both of them seemed startled by the intimacy of it. "Then we'll face it together. I won't let them take you, Violet." She looked at their joined hands, then up to his face, searching his eyes. "Why? Why would you risk yourself for me?" "Because." Abram hesitated, then decided that if they were facing uncertain times ahead, honesty was the only path forward. "Because these past months with you have been the most meaningful of my life. Because I admire your courage and your brilliance. Because the thought of this farm of my life without you in it seems empty." Violet's eyes widened, a flush spreading across her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. "Abram, you don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I'm not asking for promises, just want you to know you're not alone in this." To his surprise, Violet moved closer, her free hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "What if I want to make promises?" she whispered. "What if I've been afraid to admit how much you've come to mean to me?" The snowfall outside intensified as Abram drew her into his arms, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. In that moment, the uncertain future, the threats from Denver, the skepticism of their neighbors, all of it seemed distant and unimportant compared to the certainty they found in each other. Winter descended on Montana territory with brutal efficiency. By mid-November, snow blanketed the landscape, and temperatures plummeted to bone-chilling levels that tested the improvements Abram and Violet had made to the farmhouse. The greenhouse they had completed just before the first heavy snowfall proved its worth, allowing them to continue growing certain hardy vegetables despite the harsh conditions outside. Their days fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings began with Abram tending to the goats and chickens while Violet prepared breakfast. They would work together in the greenhouse or on indoor projects like repairing furniture and equipment. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading from Abram's modest collection of books, planning spring plantings, or simply talking about their lives before they met. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. What had begun as a business partnership had transformed into something neither had expected to find a profound connection built on shared values, mutual respect, and growing love. They still maintained separate sleeping quarters, honoring propriety despite the lack of neighbors to observe it, but the promise of a future together warmed the cold winter nights. In early December, Sarah Jenkins arrived at their farm with her husband Thomas and their 2 young children. The family looked thin and worried, and it didn't take long to learn why. "Our stores are running low," Thomas explained reluctantly as they sat at Abram and Violet's kitchen table. Pride made the admission difficult for him. "Wheat failed again this year and game's been scarce." "The children haven't had fresh vegetables in weeks," Sarah added, glancing at her daughter and son, who were eyeing the plate of roasted root vegetables Violet had set before them with poorly concealed hunger. "Eat," Violet encouraged the children gently. "There's plenty more." As the children ate, the adults discussed the situation facing many of Watsonville's outlying farms and homesteads. An early frost had damaged crops, and heavy snow had made hunting difficult. The Thornton Ranch and a few other large operations were doing fine, but smaller landholders were struggling. "Jacob Thornton's offering to buy out anyone who can't make it through winter," Thomas said bitterly. "Says it's generous, but the prices are insultingly low." Taking advantage of desperate folks, Abram and Violet exchanged glances. "We have surplus," Violet said. "Not just vegetables, but dried beans and lentils that store well and provide good protein." "We can't take charity," Thomas began, but his wife interrupted him. "Thomas Jenkins, you put your pride aside when our children's bellies are empty," she said firmly. "Besides, Violet's offering to teach me her growing methods come spring. That's not charity, it's neighbors helping neighbors." After some discussion, an arrangement was reached. The Jenkins family would leave with a supply of food, and Thomas would help Abram with some heavy work around the farm when weather permitted. More importantly, they agreed to spread word to other struggling families that the Vaughn farm had food to share. Not charity, Abram emphasized. Trade for labor or skills when spring comes, or seeds from whatever they've managed to save. After the Jenkins family departed with their precious cargo of food, Violet turned to Abram with a thoughtful expression. "We could do more. What are you thinking?" "The greenhouse has space we're not using, and I've been experimenting with sprouting techniques that don't require soil, just jars and water." Her eyes lit up with the excitement that always accompanied her scientific ideas. "We could produce fresh greens throughout winter, nutritious, fast-growing." Abram smiled at her enthusiasm. "Always thinking ahead, aren't you?" "Someone has to," she replied with a teasing smile that warmed him more than the fire. Over the next few weeks, word spread about the Vaughn farm's abundance. At first, only a few desperate families ventured out through the snow to seek help. Abram and Violet welcomed each one, sharing not only food but knowledge. Violet taught the women about preserving techniques and how to grow sprouts in their homes, while Abram showed the men how their irrigation and greenhouse systems worked. News of their generosity eventually reached town, where opinions about the eccentric farming couple began to shift. Martha Wilson made a point of telling her customers about the fresh vegetables she was still able to stock thanks to the Vaughn greenhouse. Sheriff Miller mentioned the reduced tension among struggling families who now had enough to eat. Not everyone was pleased, however. Jacob Thornton, whose plans to expand his holdings by purchasing failing farms were being thwarted by Abram and Violet's assistance, made his displeasure known. "You're interfering with the natural order," he told Abram bluntly when they encountered each other at the general store just before Christmas. Thornton was an imposing man in his 50s, with cold eyes that had seen hard times and learned the wrong lessons from them. "Weak operations fail, strong ones survive. That's how the West was built." "The West was built by people helping each other through hard times," Abram countered. "Not by the strong preying on the weak." Thornton's expression darkened. "Pretty words from a man who couldn't tell a plow from a harrow 6 months ago. You and that woman of yours are just postponing the inevitable. One harsh winter doesn't prove anything." "We're not trying to prove anything, Mr. Thornton," Violet interjected, joining them with her purchases. "We're just living according to our values," Thornton scoffed. "Values don't feed people in the long run, Miss Vance. Hard decisions and practical thinking do." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I hear you've got troubles back east. Shame if authorities there got specific information about your whereabouts." Abram stepped between them. "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Thornton." "Just an observation," Thornton replied with a cold smile. "Enjoy your Christmas. Might be your last one on that farm." As they drove home through the snow, Violet was uncharacteristically quiet. "He can't hurt us," Abram finally said, breaking the silence. "Sheriff Miller's already made it clear where he stands." "It's not just about me anymore," Violet replied, her breath fogging in the cold air. "The families who depend on us now, if Thornton forces us off the land somehow, what happens to them?" "We won't let that happen," Abram assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. Thornton was powerful and vindictive, a dangerous combination. Their Christmas was simple but meaningful, marked by small handmade gifts, and a dinner shared with the Jenkins family and 2 other neighboring households that had become regular visitors. The house was filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense of community that neither Abram nor Violet had experienced before. That night, after their guests had departed and the house was quiet save for the crackling of the fire, Abram presented Violet with one final gift, a small wooden box he had carved himself during the long evenings of early winter. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the intricate pattern of leaves and vines he had etched into the lid. "Open it," Abram encouraged, his heart pounding with nervous anticipation. Inside, nestled on a small cushion of fabric, was a ring, a simple band of silver with a small purple stone set into it. Violet's breath caught as she lifted it from the box. "It was my mother's," Abram explained softly. "The only thing of value she left me. The stone reminded me of your eyes." "Abram," Violet whispered, tears gathering in those violet eyes. "I know this is fast," he continued hurriedly, "and there's still uncertainty ahead. But I love you, Violet Vance. I love your brilliant mind, your courage, your compassion. I want to build a life with you, not just a farm, but a family, a future." Violet closed her hand around the ring, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Their kiss sealed the promise, a beacon of hope against the dark winter night and whatever challenges lay ahead. January 1875 brought the harshest weather anyone in Watsonville could remember. Blizzards swept down from the mountains, burying the region in snowdrifts higher than a man's head. Temperatures dropped so low that even the creek on Abram and Violet's property froze solid. Travel became nearly impossible, isolating homesteads and farms from town and from each other. Despite these challenges, the newly engaged couple continued their work. The greenhouse required constant attention to maintain temperature and protect the precious plants growing inside. Their sprouting operation expanded, with every available shelf space devoted to jars of lentils, beans, and grains in various stages of germination, living food that required no soil, just water and occasional attention. When the worst of the storms temporarily abated, neighbors who could make the journey arrived at the Vaughn farm seeking not only food but hope. Violet's growing reputation as both a skilled botanist and a compassionate teacher drew women especially, eager to learn techniques that might help their family survive. "You've become the most popular person in the county," Abram teased one evening as they prepared for bed still in separate rooms, though their wedding was planned for spring when the preacher could travel safely from the next town over. Violet smiled, though her expression remained thoughtful. "It's strange. I came here running from my past, convinced I needed to hide who I was and what I knew. Now it seems that embracing those very things has given me a place to belong." "You belong here," Abram said softly. "With me, with this community that's growing around us." The relative peace of their winter routine was shattered in late January when Sheriff Miller arrived at their door, his horse exhausted from battling through the deep snow. "Telegram from Denver," he said without preamble once they'd ushered him inside and pressed a hot drink into his hands. Official this time. Warrant for the arrest of Violet Vance on charges of theft and aggravated assault against Edward Preston. Violet's face paled, but she remained composed. "I expected this eventually." "What's the procedure?" Abram asked, his mind already racing through potential options. Miller sighed heavily. "Officially, I'm supposed to take Miss Vance into custody and arrange transport to Denver when weather permits." He looked directly at Violet. "Unofficially, I came to warn you, give you time to decide what you want to do." "You'd let me run?" Violet asked, surprised. "I've seen what you two have built here," Miller replied. "Seen how many families might not have made it through this winter without your help. That counts for something in my book." He took another sip of his drink. "Besides, I made some inquiries about this Preston fellow. Seems he has a history of inappropriate behavior with female employees. You wouldn't be the first to flee his attention." Abram placed a protective hand on Violet's shoulder. "We appreciate the warning, Sheriff, but we're done running." Violet looked up at him, startled. "Abram, you don't understand. The Prestons have influence, money, connections, and we have the truth," Abram interrupted gently. "Plus something they don't expect." "What's that?" Miller asked curiously. "A community that stands with us," Abram replied. "Sheriff, how many families in this county have survived this winter because of Violet's knowledge? How many children still have food in their bellies because of what we've grown here?" Miller nodded slowly. "Nearly a third of the smaller homesteads, by my count. And that's not including the folks in town who have benefited from the fresh vegetables at Wilson's store." "Then help us gather them," Abram requested. "Not to obstruct justice, but to ensure it's actually justice being served, not a powerful man's vengeance." The sheriff considered this for a long moment. "I'll give you 3 days before I officially acknowledge receipt of the telegram. Make them count." After Miller departed, Violet turned to Abram, her expression torn between love and worry. "You shouldn't have to fight my battles." "There are battles now," he replied, drawing her close. "And we won't fight alone." The next morning, despite the bitter cold, Abram set out on horseback to the nearest homesteads, carrying word of Violet's situation and their need for support. By nightfall, Thomas Jenkins and 2 other neighboring farmers had arrived at the farm, determined to help however they could. "Miss Violet saved my children from hunger," Jenkins stated simply. "That's a debt that can't be repaid with silence." Over the next 2 days, as word spread through the determined network of homesteaders, more supporters arrived. Women who had learned from Violet, men who had benefited from their innovations. Families who had made it through the winter because of their generosity all came to stand with them. Martha Wilson arrived with her husband, bringing news from town. "Jacob Thornton's been smirking all over the place," she reported. "Word is he's the one who sent specific information to Denver about Violet's whereabouts." "That doesn't surprise me," Abram replied grimly. "He's been trying to get rid of us since we arrived." By the third day, when Sheriff Miller returned as promised, he found over 20 people gathered at the Vaughn farm, a significant showing given the dangerous travel conditions and the scattered population of the county. "Well," he said, surveying the determined faces, "this complicates matters." "Sheriff," Thomas Jenkins stepped forward, speaking for the group, "we're not here to obstruct the law, but we want to testify to Miss Vance's character and to what she's done for this community." "And," added Sarah Jenkins, "we want to hear her side of the story before anyone passes judgment." Miller nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable enough. Miss Vance," all eyes turned to Violet, who stood tall despite her evident nervousness. With Abram's supportive presence beside her, she recounted her experience with the Preston family, her hiring to develop drought-resistant crops, Edward Preston's attempts to take credit for her work, his unwanted advances, and finally, the night she had defended herself against his assault. "I took only my own research notes when I left," she concluded. "Papers containing my observations, my experiments, my conclusions. If that's theft, then they stole from me first my ideas, my work, and nearly my dignity." A murmur of support rippled through the gathered crowd. Martha Wilson, never one to hold her tongue, spoke up forcefully. "Sounds to me like this Preston fellow is the criminal, not Miss Violet," she declared, to general agreement. Sheriff Miller rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "The law's complicated when it crosses state lines and involves influential people, but there is such a thing as community justice." He turned to address the crowd. "Would anyone here be willing to put their name to a sworn statement regarding Miss Vance's character and contributions?" Every hand raised without hesitation. "And," Miller continued, "would anyone be willing to testify about the assistance they've received during this difficult winter?" Again, a unanimous show of hands. Miller nodded, satisfied. "Then here's what I propose. I'll respond to the Denver authorities that Miss Vance is indeed in my jurisdiction, but that significant evidence regarding her character and the circumstances of the alleged crimes has come to light. I'll include your sworn statements and suggest that if Mr. Preston wishes to pursue charges, he should come to Watsonville himself to present his case." "Will that work?" Violet asked cautiously. "Men like Preston rarely want to face their accusers directly," Miller replied. "Especially when those accusers have community support. They prefer to work through proxies and official channels. My guess is he'll find some reason why he can't possibly travel to such a remote location." The relief on Violet's face was palpable. "Thank you, Sheriff." "And thank you all," she added, looking around at the gathered neighbors with tears in her eyes. "I never expected to find such support." "That's what community means," Sarah Jenkins said simply, "standing together when one of us is threatened." As their supporters gradually departed, promising continued vigilance and assistance if needed, Abram and Violet found themselves momentarily alone in the kitchen. The emotional exhaustion of the day caught up with Violet, and she collapsed into Abram's embrace. "I still can't believe they all came," she whispered against his chest. "In this weather, risking so much." "You've earned their loyalty," Abram replied, stroking her hair, "not by asking for it, but by giving yours first." February brought a brief thaw enough to melt some of the deepest snowdrifts and allow more regular travel between isolated homesteads and into town. The improved conditions also permitted Sheriff Miller to send his carefully worded response to the Denver authorities, along with over 20 sworn statements testifying to Violet's character and contributions to the community. Meanwhile, Jacob Thornton, frustrated by the growing support for Abram and Violet, decided on a more direct approach. He arrived at their farm one afternoon with his son Daniel and 3 ranch hands, their expressions grim and purposeful. "This has gone far enough," Thornton announced without greeting as Abram met them in the yard. "You're undermining the natural order of things in this valley. Strong operations absorb the weak, that's how progress happens." "If by progress you mean you owning everything and everyone depending on you, I disagree," Abram replied calmly, though he was acutely aware of being outnumbered. Violet was in the greenhouse with Sarah Jenkins, thankfully out of immediate danger. "I've been more than patient," Thornton continued. "Offered you fair price for this worthless land, but now you're interfering with my business interests. Those farmers who should be selling to me are holding out because of your handouts." "They're not handouts," Abram corrected. "They're neighbors helping neighbors, and the land isn't worthless, we've proven that." Daniel Thornton stepped forward, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "Pause trying to be reasonable. One last chance, sell to us now, take your woman and leave the territory. Or we'll make sure the authorities in Denver know exactly how to find her." "Too late for that threat," came Sheriff Miller's voice as he rode into the yard, accompanied by Thomas Jenkins and several other farmers. "Denver authorities already know where Miss Vance is. And they've been given quite an education about her situation." Thornton's face darkened with anger. "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff. Threats against citizens of my county very much concern me," Miller replied, dismounting, "as does attempted intimidation." The tension in the yard was palpable as the two groups faced each other. Then, unexpectedly, the door of the greenhouse opened and Violet emerged, followed by Sarah Jenkins and several other women. "Mr. Thornton," Violet called out clearly, approaching without fear. "Your quarrel isn't with Abram, it's with me." "Violet," Abram cautioned, but she continued walking until she stood directly before Jacob Thornton. "You want this land because it threatens your control over this valley," she stated. "You can't stand that we've succeeded where others failed because it gives people hope and options beyond depending on you." Thornton glared down at her. "You're an outsider. You don't understand how things work here." "I understand perfectly," Violet replied, "but your way isn't the only way. We've shown that even the most challenging land can produce when knowledge and innovation replace brute force and domination." "Pretty speech," Daniel Thornton sneered. "Won't mean much when you're facing charges in Denver." Sarah Jenkins stepped forward then, her normally gentle demeanor replaced by fierce determination. "If Miss Violet goes to Denver, she won't go alone. Half the women in this county will go with her to testify about how she saved our families this winter." "And the men too," added Thomas Jenkins, standing beside his wife. Sheriff Miller nodded in agreement. "It would make quite an impression on the judge, especially when contrasted with the Preston boy's reputation, which I've taken the liberty of inquiring about. Seems he has a history of similar complaints that his family's money has made disappear." Jacob Thornton looked around at the united front before him, calculation replacing anger in his eyes. He was a businessman above all, and the odds were clearly shifting. "This isn't over," he finally said, turning back to his horse. "Land and water are limited resources. Sooner or later, reality will catch up with your experiments." "Perhaps," Abram acknowledged, "but until then, we'll continue growing food and sharing knowledge." As the Thorntons and their men rode away, the tension in the yard gradually dissipated, replaced by cautious relief and a deepening sense of community solidarity. That evening, after their supporters had departed, Abram found Violet sitting on the porch despite the cold, gazing up at the stars scattered across the clear Montana sky. "You were brave today," he said, settling beside her. "Braver than I wanted you to be." She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I learned it from you, standing your ground even when others mock your choices." "Do you think Thornton will truly back down?" "Not permanently," Violet replied thoughtfully, "but he's a practical man beneath the bluster. He won't waste resources on a fight he can't win through intimidation, and with each passing day, our position grows stronger." Abram nodded, drawing her closer for warmth. "Sheriff Miller thinks the Denver matter will likely fade away too." With the community statements and the suggestion that Preston would need to come testify in person, there's little incentive for them to pursue it. Then we can truly begin planning our future, Violet said, a hint of wonder in her voice. It still seems unreal sometimes that I found this place, found you, found acceptance despite everything. Not despite everything, Abram corrected gently. Because of everything. Your knowledge, your courage in starting over, your willingness to share what you know, those are the reasons you've been embraced here. March brought the first real signs of spring to Montana territory. Snow began to retreat from sun-exposed slopes, revealing tender green shoots beneath. The creek thawed, resuming its cheerful gurgle across the Vaughn property. Inside the greenhouse, seedlings for the coming growing season stretched toward the strengthening sun, promising an even more abundant harvest than the previous year. Word arrived from Denver, relayed through Sheriff Miller, that the charges against Violet had been withdrawn. Edward Preston, faced with the prospect of traveling to Montana to press his case against a woman with overwhelming community support, had suddenly recalled that the incident had been a misunderstanding. The research papers his family now claimed had been intended as a gift to Miss Vance for her contributions. A convenient revision of events, Violet remarked dryly when Miller delivered the news. But I'll accept it if it means closing this chapter. Consider it closed, Miller confirmed. Though I'd still recommend avoiding Denver for the foreseeable future. I have no desire to leave Watsonville, Violet assured him, glancing at Abram with a smile that spoke volumes. With the threats from both the Thorntons and Denver neutralized, at least temporarily, Abram and Violet turned their attention to two significant events: spring planting and their wedding. The preacher from the next county over had confirmed he would arrive in early April, when the roads were passable, but before the busiest farming season began. Sarah Jenkins and several other women from neighboring homesteads helped Violet prepare for the ceremony, working together to create a simple but beautiful wedding dress using fabric ordered specially from Helena. Meanwhile, Abram and Thomas Jenkins, along with other men who had benefited from the couple's generosity during winter, worked to expand the farmhouse, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the main living area to better accommodate the community gatherings that had become a regular feature of life at the Vaughn farm. On a perfect spring morning in mid-April, with wildflowers beginning to dot the hills and birdsong filling the air, Abram Vaughn and Violet Vance were married beneath the budding branches of a wild plum tree near the creek. Nearly everyone from Watsonville and the surrounding homesteads attended, creating the largest gathering the small farm had ever seen. Sheriff Miller gave the bride away, a role he accepted with gruff emotion. "Never thought I'd see this place transformed the way you two have transformed it," he told them during the celebration afterward. Not just the land, but the spirit of the community. Martha Wilson, who had become one of Violet's staunchest supporters, wiped tears from her eyes as she embraced the new Mrs. Vaughn. "When Abram first bought this place, I thought he was the biggest fool in the territory," she admitted. "Now look at what you've created together. It's a miracle." "Not a miracle," Violet corrected gently. "Just knowledge applied with care and perseverance. And love," Abram added, his arm around his bride's waist. "Don't forget that part." Notably absent from the celebration were the Thorntons, though rumors circulated that Jacob had recently traveled east, seeking financial backing for expansion plans that no longer included absorbing the Vaughn property. Whether this represented true acceptance of defeat or merely a tactical retreat remained to be seen. As the festive day drew to a close and guests began their journeys home, promising to return soon for the planting workshops Violet had organized, the newly married couple found themselves finally alone on the porch of their improved home. "Happy, Mrs. Vaughn?" Abram asked, still marveling at the reality of their union. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Violet replied, leaning into his embrace as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and pink. "Though I do hope you'll still call me Violet most of the time, Mrs. Vaughn makes me feel like I should be someone's stern schoolteacher." Abram laughed. "You are someone's teacher, dozens of someone's, in fact. You've taught this entire community to see possibilities where they only saw obstacles." "We did that together," Violet corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "My knowledge wouldn't have mattered without your courage in taking a chance on this land and on me." "Best gamble I ever made," Abram murmured before kissing her, a kiss that held the promise of the night to come and all the days and years that would follow. The summer of 1875 proved even more productive than their first season. The soil improvements Violet had initiated with the nitrogen-fixing crops began to show dramatic results, and the expanded greenhouse allowed for greater experimentation with different varieties. The goat herd had grown, providing milk and cheese that supplemented their plant-based diet and offered another valuable resource to share with neighbors. Word of the Vaughn farm's innovative methods spread beyond Watsonville, bringing occasional visitors from as far away as Helena and Bozeman farmers and ranchers curious about drought-resistant crops and sustainable techniques. Violet maintained detailed records of all their experiments and results, eventually compiling them into a practical guide that Martha Wilson proudly displayed and sold at the general store. Jacob Thornton, true to his nature, had not entirely abandoned his ambitions. His Eastern funding secured, he began construction of a dam upstream from several smaller properties, including the Vaughn farm, an action that threatened to reduce their creek to a trickle during crucial growing periods. Rather than confront Thornton directly, Abram and Violet organized the affected landowners into a coalition that appealed to territorial authorities. The resulting investigation revealed that Thornton's dam would violate water rights established in previous land grants. Faced with legal challenges and unified community opposition, he was forced to modify his plans significantly. "He'll try something else eventually," Sheriff Miller warned during one of his regular visits to the farm. "Men like Thornton don't easily accept limitations on their power." "We'll be ready," Abram replied confidently, "and stronger with each passing season." By the fall harvest of 1875, the Vaughn farm had become not just a source of food security for the region but a center of learning and community cooperation. Regular workshops drew women and men eager to learn Violet's techniques for growing and preserving food. Children came to marvel at the greenhouse and help with age-appropriate tasks, absorbing knowledge that would serve them throughout their lives. And in November, as the first snows once again blanketed the Montana landscape, Violet shared joyful news with her husband they would be welcoming a child of their own in the late spring. "A new life to add to all we've created here," Abram said in wonder, his hand gently resting on his wife's still flat stomach. "The most important crop we'll ever grow," Violet agreed with a radiant smile. As winter once again tightened its grip on the territory, the Vaughn farm stood ready. The root cellar was filled to capacity with preserved vegetables and fruits. The greenhouse continued producing fresh greens. The sprouting operation had been expanded and refined. The lessons of the previous difficult winter had been well learned and applied. When January 1876 brought a blizzard that surpassed even the previous year's storms in ferocity, surrounding homesteads knew where to turn. The Vaughn farm became a temporary shelter for several families whose own homes couldn't withstand the brutal conditions. For 2 weeks, the expanded farmhouse accommodated nearly 20 people, adults and children, sharing space, food, and the warmth of community bonds that had been forged through shared hardship and mutual support. Among those sheltering at the farm was Daniel Thornton, who had been caught in the blizzard while returning from a distant ranch. Injured when his horse fell in the deep snow, he had been found by Thomas Jenkins and brought to the nearest safe haven, the home of the family his father had tried to drive away. Initial tension gave way to cautious civility as Violet treated his injured leg with the same care she would have shown any patient, using her knowledge of medicinal plants to reduce pain and prevent infection. Abram ensured he had the same portions of food as everyone else, neither more nor less. "Why are you helping me?" Daniel finally asked on the third night, his defenses worn down by pain, exhaustion, and the undeniable warmth of the community surrounding him. "After everything my father's done, everything I've said and done. Because that's what neighbors do," Violet replied simply. "Even difficult neighbors." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "Pa says your methods won't last, that you're just having a few lucky seasons before nature reasserts itself." He may be right, Abram acknowledged, joining the conversation. "Every approach has its limitations. But we're learning and adapting constantly. That's something your father's methods don't allow for change based on results rather than rigid adherence to tradition." "I've seen your results," Daniel admitted grudgingly. "Everyone has. It's why Pa feels threatened." This frank acknowledgement from the younger Thornton marked a subtle but significant shift. While Jacob Thornton continued to oppose and undermine the Vaughns' influence whenever possible, Daniel gradually developed a reluctant respect for their achievements. After recovering from his injuries, he occasionally visited the farm, initially with transparent excuses but eventually with honest questions about their methods. By spring 1876, as Violet's pregnancy progressed and new life stirred beneath the warming soil, the Vaughn farm had become an undeniable success story, not just surviving but thriving on land that had been dismissed as worthless. The techniques Violet had developed and freely shared had spread throughout the county, increasing yields and resilience for many who had previously struggled at the margins of survival. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers carpeting the hills and the creek running full with snowmelt, Violet gave birth to a healthy son they named James Thomas Vaughn James for Abram's father, Thomas for their loyal friend and neighbor who had stood by them through the most challenging times. As news of the birth spread through the community, visitors arrived bearing gifts and congratulations. Even Martha Wilson closed the general store for an afternoon to come see the newest resident of Watsonville. Sheriff Miller arrived with a handcrafted wooden cradle, revealing a talent for woodworking that few had suspected. "Never thought I'd see so much life coming from this old place," he commented as he set up the cradle beside the bed where Violet rested with her newborn. "When I first rode out here to check on Abram after he bought it, I gave him 6 months at most." "Most people did," Violet replied, smiling down at her son. "But Abram saw potential where others saw only failure." "You both did," Miller corrected. "That's the real story here, 2 people believing in possibility when everyone else had given up." As spring turned to summer and little James grew stronger each day, Abram often found himself watching his wife and son with a sense of wonder that never diminished. The woman who had arrived as a hungry stranger, whom neighbors had mocked and dismissed, had transformed not just his land but the entire community's understanding of what was possible in this harsh but beautiful territory. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while James slept peacefully in his mother's arms, Abram reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Remember when you first arrived?" he asked. "Knife in hand, ready to run." Violet smiled at the memory. "I was so tired of running by then, but I didn't dare hope I'd found a place to stay. And now." She looked around at the thriving farm, the fields green with diverse crops, the expanded greenhouse gleaming in the evening light, the outbuildings that housed their growing operations, the well-worn paths where neighbors regularly came to learn and share. "Now I know what home truly means," she replied softly. "Not just a place to stay, but a place to belong, to contribute, to grow." Abram reached over to gently touch his sleeping son's cheek, and to raise the next generation who might see even further than we have. "With better beginnings than either of us had," Violet agreed. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, The couple sat in companionable silence, surrounded by the tangible results of their shared vision, a once barren farm transformed into a center of abundance and learning, a community strengthened by cooperation rather than competition, and the promise of a future limited only by imagination and perseverance. The hunger that had once marked Violet's arrival was now a distant memory, replaced by security not just for themselves, but for many who had learned from their example. The mockery that had followed Abram's purchase of worthless land had given way to respect and even emulation, as neighboring farms began adopting similar techniques with promising results. Jacob Thornton remained a powerful force in the region, but he had been forced to recognize that not all growth came through acquisition and domination. His son Daniel, much to everyone's surprise, had begun experimenting with some of Violet's methods on a small section of the Thornton ranch quietly at first, but with increasing confidence as positive results emerged. As darkness settled over the Vaughn farm and the small family prepared to move inside for the night, Abram paused for one last look at the land that had changed the course of so many lives, including his own. "We should plant more of those wild plum trees along the creek," he suggested, "for James and his children to enjoy someday. And for all the children of Watsonville," Violet added, "a living reminder that beauty and abundance can grow even in the unlikeliest places if someone believes enough to try. And if that someone finds the right partner to try with," Abram amended, drawing his wife and son close as they stepped into the warm light of the home they had built together, not just with lumber and nails, but with courage, knowledge, and unwavering faith in each other. In the years that followed, the story of Abram and Violet Vaughn became something of a legend in Montana territory, how a former cowboy's seemingly foolish purchase and a desperate botanist's chance arrival had transformed not just a barren farm but an entire community's understanding of resilience and possibility. Their methods spread beyond Watsonville, influencing agricultural practices throughout the region and saving countless families from failure in the harsh conditions of the American frontier. And whenever new settlers arrived, discouraged by the challenges of wresting a living from the unforgiving land, old-timers would point them toward the thriving farm where it all began, saying with quiet pride, "Go see the Vaughns. They'll show you what's possible when knowledge meets perseverance, and when neighbors stand together against whatever storms may come."